my silver, my gold. Take my silver and my gold. Not a mite would I withhold. Take my intellect and use every power as you choose. Every power as you choose. Take my voice, and let me sing. Always only for my King. Take my lips and let them be filled with messages from me. Filled with messages from me. Take my will and make it thine. It shall be no longer mine. Take my heart, it is thine own. It shall be thy royal throne. It shall be thy royal throne. Take my love, my Lord, I pour at thy feet its treasure store. Take myself and I will be ever only all for thee. Ever only all for thee. Ever only all for thee. Ever only all for thee.
Amen. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Sarah. Starting a new sermon series today. I'll tell you more about that in just a minute, but it's going to be on the book of Judges for the month of July. We'll be looking at different judges, a different judge each week, and today we're going to be starting with an interesting story from Judges 4. So if you want to follow along, the words will be up on the screen, or you're welcome, of course, to use your own Bible. And I apologize in advance if I'm going to go a little slower through this. There are some complicated names in this particular passage of Scripture. So hear now these words from Judges 4. The Israelites again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died. So the Lord sold them into the hand of King Jabin of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth HaGoyim. Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help, for he had 900 chariots of iron and had oppressed the Israelites cruelly for 20 years. At that time, Deborah, a prophetess, wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites came up to her for judgment. She sent and summoned Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh and Naphtali, and said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go take position at Mount Tabor, bringing 10,000 from the tribe of Naphtali to the tribe of Zebulun. And I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you in the Wadi Kishon with his chariots and his troops, and I will give him into your hand." Barak said to her, "If you will go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go." And she said, "I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman." Then Deborah got up and went with Barak to Kadesh. Barak summoned Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh, and 10,000 warriors went up behind him. and Deborah went with him. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So as you know, today's 4th of July, Independence Day, a day when we set aside time to remember our own independence, our gratitude for our nation, this place where we can worship freely, where we can lead free lives, where we can pursue vocations that we feel led to pursue, instruct our children as we want to, and so forth. An important day. It's interesting that actually the book of Judges also coincides with a time period when the Israelites are trying to figure out what independence looks like. So we get to the point today in the Old Testament where we are in the book of Judges. And just to give a little bit of a background on where Judges fits within the whole story, let me do a quick run through for about 30 seconds, maybe a little longer, of the Old Testament. So you remember in Genesis, we have the beginning story, and by the end of the book of Genesis, we have what's going on is that Jacob has 12 sons. Joseph is the son who goes and ends up sold into slavery in Egypt. He rises to power there against all odds, brings in his father and family, brings in his brothers, and all of them survive the famine, and the Hebrew people then grow and continue. Fast forward now many years, the Hebrew people continue to grow and to thrive. And all of a sudden, one day, the Pharaoh looks out on the Hebrew population and says, wow, this got big in a hurry, and if they want to, there could be an insurrection, they could take control, and all of a sudden, the size of this small, once a minority population in our community feels quite big to us, and what if they overthrow us? And so he gives this really cruel order that all of the firstborn males shall be tossed into the Nile River, thus decimating the population growth. Well, Moses survives that, and he grows up living sort of as a half Hebrew person and half Egyptian person, and he ends up striking a man dead, running off and hiding in a faraway land, comes back after God speaks to him through the burning bush, which we talked about at VBS, right guys? Goes back into Egypt, says to the Pharaoh, you've got to release my people. Pharaoh says no, there's plagues, there's the Passover event, the people are rescued and taken through the Red Sea, and now they spend 40 years wandering in the wilderness. And then, after that amount of time, God says, okay, it's now appropriate that you enter into the promised land. Joshua goes in, leads the people into the promised land. They rout all the people who are living in that place, and they are now free to begin to establish their new lives as the Israelites have a land of their own that is going to be their place. Now, if you read Joshua, the end of Joshua would seem to suggest that all is well. Like all of the people have been chased out. Now the Israelites have a land of their own. They are going to be able to establish their own society, worship the one true God, the only God, and everything is going to be fine. Except when we get into Judges, we find that in fact there are lots of people still inhabiting the land who are not the Jewish people, the Israelites. In fact, there are neighboring cultures and communities who keep coming in and vying for the land too. And so it's not all peaceful and calm and rosy. Things are actually a bit of a struggle. And the problem, way back since the beginning, is that the people, the Israelites, always seem to be tempted every so often with going off and worshiping foreign idols or foreign deities. And God says, even in the first commandment, nope, there's one God, you will worship me. And despite Moses' instruction, despite Aaron's later instruction, despite Joshua's instruction, the people continue to gravitate time after time to these foreign idols. Now, sometimes that's foreign influence. Sometimes that's marrying people from other cultures and bringing them in. Sometimes it's just maybe there's been a time period where it feels like God's a little distant, or maybe we haven't heard God communicating with us and offering the kind of clear directives that we've had in the past. And whenever those moments happen, there seems to be a backsliding temptation kind of period where the people slide back into their old ways and they start worshiping a foreign god. what happens is, whenever that happens, the people start to have struggles. A neighboring army comes in, conquers the people, and it's like that for a time period until the people cry out and they say, God, save us. We don't want to be under this foreign rule. We want to worship you again. We promise we won't do it again. And God delivers the people, but then they go back to their old ways again. And so it's like this pattern, back and forth, for several generations. And it's during that time period that we have the period of the judges. So, they're out of Egypt, they're out of wandering in the wilderness, they're now in the promised land, but things aren't quite perfect yet. And we haven't yet reached the point of the kings. The period of the kings and the kingdoms, that is still down the road. So it's this in-between time, and it's the period of the judges. Now, judges is a name that feels like a misnomer when you read the scriptures. So if you read the book of Judges, you say these people don't sound like judges at all. See, we think of judges as judicial judges, right? Somebody who is meant to listen to two sides that have opposing interests and to rule on behalf of one, or to strike some sort of a balance or an equitable solution. You go to a judge back then and even today to have somebody help you work through a stalemate in a legal dispute. But in biblical times, that word judge is actually somebody who is a deliverer. That's actually probably a better translation, or at least in terms of what we would describe as an Old Testament biblical judge, we would probably be better suited to use the word deliverer. So when this is the period of the judges, this is the period of the deliverers. And the deliverers would all kind of have a similar kind of pattern. Again, the people fall into apostasy. They cry out, God, save us again. We've made a mistake. God sends a deliverer. The deliverer helps the people out of their predicament, and everything is good for a period of years until they fall back into their old ways. And then the cycle repeats and repeats and repeats. Every single one of the judges, nearly all of them, follow that same pattern. And more often than not, these deliverers are in the form of military deliverers. They are ones who are mighty warriors or strong leaders in battle. And they come in and they rout the enemies, and they say, this victory is attributed to God, and we move forward as a peaceful kingdom once again, able to worship the God of our ancestors, the one true God. Now, let's step back for just a second and make something clear. If you read the book of Judges today, there will in all likelihood be many things in there that make you feel uncomfortable. For one, it's a super violent book. Super violent, like Joshua, and then sometimes with more detail. Okay, so it's graphic accounts, and there's lots of sex and violence and murder and intrigue and mystery and all this stuff. And so I thought that at the time of the year when we normally get a summer blockbuster movie, and Marvel's releasing their umpteenth movie this year as their big summer blockbuster, this is sort of like the big blockbuster book of the Old Testament, right? This is the book that's got all of that action in it. But if we read it and we say, well, wait a minute, that's interesting as a storyline, but as a person of a believer, as a person of faith, I gotta admit, I'm uneasy about this. I mean, this condoned, this sanctioned violence, this wiping out of other people, of other tribes, of other cultures, because they believe something a little different or because they were on the land earlier. Does this seem right? And I think we'd be right for asking those questions. I mean, those are hard things to grapple with, for sure. But let's remember that this book of Judges is not a book that is supposed to be a moral compass for us. Judges' point, the intention behind this book, is to talk about how God came in, delivered the people by sending judges time and time again, and no matter how many times the people messed up, God said, okay, I'm going to forgive you, I'm going to deliver you, and I have not turned my back forever on you. And so it's meant to be both chronological in the sense that this is a part of the story of the Israelites, but it's also meant to speak about God's nature. Now, we bring all kinds of hang-ups into that story about violence and about pacifism and about those kinds of things. And all of those things are right for us to ask. But that's not the thrust behind the book of Judges. That's not the question it seeks to answer. Those are not the issues it's responding to. So we could talk about that at another time, but for the sake of the next few weeks, we're just going to be looking at the stories of the judges and what lesson do they have to communicate to each one of us. So you heard me just read about a few judges into the story. She's not the first judge, but the first judge that we come to in today's story is a woman named Deborah, which is kind of interesting. Now, everything I just told you about judges not being judicial judges and being deliverers, yeah, well, that's true with all of the other judges, except for Deborah's a kind of a both and. As you've already heard, Deborah's about to go into battle, but she also had this role where she was a respected citizen and a prophetess, meaning that God communicated through her and the people understood that part about her life. And she sat situated between two small towns on a hilltop underneath a palm tree that was called Deborah's palm tree, which is a good place for Deborah to sit. So that she got a tree named after her, after all. So she's sitting underneath this palm tree, Deborah's palm tree, and people would come to her and they would have disputes or they would have arguments. And they would come to Deborah and they would say, help us sort this out. But Deborah, in her dual role, is not only being somebody who helps resolve conflict, she also, as a prophetess, one day received a message. Now, the problem is that during Deborah's time of doing this job that she's doing, the Canaanites have been ruling cruelly for 20 years. You see, before this, there was another judge named Ehud, and Ehud we're going to talk about in 2 weeks. Ehud's got a gross and violent story. We'll talk about that later. Ehud brought the people, he delivered them, and everything was good for a period of time, and then they started worshiping foreign gods, fell back into that pattern. Now it's been 20 years of oppression and a hardship underneath the Canaanites. So Deborah gets this message from God one day and says, bring Barak to you and tell him this special message from God. Deborah calls for Barak, who is the general of the Israelites' army, and Barak reports to Deborah. Says, yes, what do you have to share with me? Well, God sent me a message, and here's the message. You are going to go to the base of the mountain, you are going to assemble your army, and you are going to battle it out with the Canaanite general Sisera, and you are going to have this epic fight, but because God is on your side, you will win the battle. You will rout the Canaanites, and there will be peace in the land again. This is God's message to you. And Barak says, okay, I'll do it, but only if you go with me. And Deborah says, okay, I will go with you, but just know this. By saying that, and by agreeing to this, God is going to deliver Sisera, the Canaanite general, into the hands of a woman. You will not get credit for this victory. A woman will, just so you know. And Barak says, okay. So the rest of the story goes that they go out into battle, and then it goes just as Deborah said it would. They go out into battle. Lo and behold, the underdogs, the Israelites, win, even though Sisera has 900 iron chariots. So this is brand new iron, is new technology. So when we hear in the scripture that Sisera and his army have 900 chariots, not only do they have chariots, he has iron chariots, this is going to be a landslide, right? This is like slingshots versus tanks kind of a battle. But against all odds, the Israelites prevail. But Sisera escapes on foot. So the battle is not quite done. Sisera lives to fight another day. And he runs into a neighboring community. And this community is like the Switzerland community of the time. It's not Israelite, it's not Canaanite. They're just a people who are going to be neutral, and they're going to work with everybody, and they're going to trade with everybody, and they just want to be left alone. Sisera staggers into this community, weary from battle, looks around, finds a tent. Outside the tent is this woman named Jael, and he says, "Can I go into your tent? I need to find a little respite in here." She says, "All right, come on in." She feeds him milk, she puts down blankets, she lets him lay his head down. He falls fast asleep. And here's the crazy part. Something compels Jael in this moment to pick up a tent stake and a hammer and drive it into the temple of Sisera's head, pinning him to the ground, striking him dead. The army of the Israelites comes by and they're looking for Sisera. They track him down. They look into the tent and Jael goes, "Hey, got something to show you." There he is, lying dead, thus fulfilling the prophecy. Sisera will be delivered, but into the hands of a woman. Okay, so whenever we do biblical reading, whenever we are going to do Bible study, whenever we are going to listen to a sermon, whenever we're going to open up our Bible and do our own devotional practices, one of the things that we seek to do is to say, okay, I read it, that's interesting, but how does this speak to me? How does this speak to my life? What do I do with this information? Judges 4, great story. What do I do with that? Now, some of us might say, okay, well, there's a message about God's faithfulness and God doing what God said God's going to do. When we turn our back on God and ask for forgiveness, God has never abandoned us. God leads us to see another day. That could be the message. That could be the message. Maybe the point of Judges 4 and all we're supposed to know is that this is connecting 2 points. We are from the point of entering the promised land, but not to the time of the kings. So what happened in the in-between? Oh, that was the judges. And this just becomes a dot on this chronological timeline. But I wonder if there's more to this story that is sort of just hidden underneath the surface. So let's go to verses 8 and 9 again. Stephen's going to throw those up on the screen for us. All right, so this is right after Barak has reported to Deborah, after she's summoned him. And the text says, Barak said to her, "If you will go with me, I will go, but if you will not go with me, I will not go." And she said, "Surely I will go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman." Now, let me just ask you this. I won't ask you to raise your hands. But think about how you heard this passage, maybe for the first time, maybe not today, but another time. Is it true that your first impulse was to think about Barak as a coward? He's a general, for crying out loud. He's a general who has now heard God is going to make sure that you win this battle. And Barak says, I don't know, will you go with me, Deborah? Will you go with me into battle? And she says, okay, I'll go with you, but just so you know, a woman's going to get the credit. Like, how many of you kind of heard the text in that sort of tone, right? I mean, there's a part of that you say, well, that sounds cowardly. That's not something that a mighty general would do. That's not somebody that just rises to the moment and says, God is on our side and we're going to take this thing and we've got this. Because if God is for us, they don't stand a chance. And then you hear, but the victory's not going to be yours, Barak. The victory is going to be credited to a woman. And how many of us think, ooh, that must have stung in the ancient Near East, right? And I don't know about that because I was reading a Bible commentary not too long ago, and the commentator is a professor who teaches Hebrew Bible or Old Testament at Princeton. He was a teacher of my wife's while she was there, actually. And one of the things that he said was, you know, the Hebrew is really ambiguous here. He said, isn't it interesting that so many of us read the text that way and we think Barak's a coward, or we think that he should have a little bit, more courage, or maybe he should just, man up a little bit. But does that say more about us and our reading of the text than the text says itself? And I wonder if I read it this way because I was taught this way, or if there's like some low-grade sexism that I wish wasn't there, that I'm seeing it this way. So let's go back and look at it again. What if we read the text this way? I'm going to do a little different inflection, and you see if it's different. But think of it more generously this time. Barak said to her, "If you go with me, I'll go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go." And she said, "I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your own glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman." Dr. Olson's point was this. He said it would not have at all been uncommon in these times in biblical history for an oracle to be shared with an army from somebody who is a prophet or a prophetess. And so the idea that Barak would invite Deborah to come along would have been kind of like, let's say the football coach says, "I'm going to invite a motivational speaker to come and speak to the team before the big game." It doesn't matter if that person's a male or a female. If they've got a good message and it's going to encourage the team, then that's a message that they need to hear. Barak may have been thinking on the same terms. Deborah, she's respected. She's a known person in these parts. When she speaks, people believe that it is the words of God being spoken through her. Why would I not want to have her by our side? This is going to be good for morale. This is going to be an encouraging word for our troops. Our boys who are going to be scared to death going into battle against these iron chariots, if they have Deborah there to say to them, "The Lord is with you, you have got this battle." I am telling you this as a prophetess from God. Why would Barak not invite her? So he says, "I don't want to go into battle unless my troops and I are convinced that God is by our side. You are the trusted voice in this community. You join us. It's going to be a difference maker for us." So if he says, "I will not go into battle unless you are there with us," and she says, "I will surely go with you," it's like she was just waiting for the invitation. But God will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman, and Barak says, "Fine. As long as we get the outcome that we are looking for, as long as we rout the Canaanites and we can have freedom again and freely worship the God that we are beholden to worship, why wouldn't we want that to be the outcome?" You see the difference, right? I mean, that's a very different reading. And Dr. Olson's point is fascinating. He says the Hebrew is totally ambiguous about this, meaning that you can read it however you want to. And I just think it's curious that sometimes we would naturally favor the less favorable reading. But when we understand what's actually going on in the context of the story, maybe it actually makes more sense for Barak to say, "Deborah, you are a trusted confidant. You are a trusted leader. I appreciate your wisdom and your counsel. Join us in battle." And she says, "Of course. I wouldn't be anywhere else." Now, if that's the reading, now we've got a message to glean from this. Now this story of Deborah is not just a blip on the timeline. This is a story that has a message to speak to us. And here's the message. In your life, who is your Deborah? Who is the person that you want by your side as you head into battle? And of course, I'm not talking about battle. I'm talking about the challenges, the adversity, the hardships, the deepest, darkest, most unpleasant places of our lives, the things that feel like they're insurmountable to us, the times that we feel like the underdog, for whatever that means. Who is that person we want by our side? Now, before you answer, let's look at some of the things that are going on here. Deborah happens to be the opposite sex of Barak. Deborah is not related to Barak. Deborah is not Barak's spouse. In fact, it says who she's married to. So, if the knee-jerk reaction is, oh, that's my spouse. Well, it may be your spouse. Oh, that's my best friend. It may be your best friend. Fine. But it may not be either. And sometimes there are things that our best friend or our spouse cannot do for us that another trusted friend can do. In fact, I was just talking about this with some family members the other day. It is hard to be the doctor. If you're a physician, it's hard to be a doctor for a family member. It is hard to be the pastor for my family. If my wife wants to go talk to a pastor, she doesn't come talk to me. She talks to another person. If you are a therapist, you don't counsel your family, right? So there are some times that those distances, those boundaries are really helpful. And so don't necessarily think it's just your partner. It could be someone else. So who is it? What does Deborah embody for Barak? Well, she's fair. She's just. She has the courage to tell Barak the hard thing even when it's not probably what he wants to hear. That's a biggie, isn't it? Deborah has the respect of the community. Deborah's wisdom is tried and true. Deborah's loyal. Deborah doesn't back down when he says, I want you to join us in battle. And she says, surely I will do that. Deborah is a person of faith. That's a biggie for us as Christians. The person that I want going into battle with me is going to be all of those things and a person of deep faith. That's the person I want with me. And I want to be that person to someone else. Time and time again, we fall into a different temptation than the Israelites. We may not be tempted to worship other gods. Yes, we will give our allegiance, our money, our time to lots of other things. But one of the things that we really struggle with is the I will go it alone, I will do it by myself, I want to be self-sufficient mentality that is so ingrained in so many of us. But this story would seem to suggest that the Israelite general says, I want a companion with me through this experience. What kind of example is that for us who are so tempted to go it alone? This is my struggle, I'm going to fight through this, I'm going to be miserable. Nonsense. Bring along a Deborah. Bring along somebody that says, surely I will walk through this hell with you. Surely I will tell you what you need to be told, even if it's not the thing you want to hear. Surely I will not abandon you. Jesus had disciples. Paul had Silas. The disciples were dispatched to go out 2 by 2 so that they would not have to do this alone. God sends these people into our lives, and these are the relationships that are worth cultivating. So if you know who your Deborah is, give that person a call. Keep that connection strong. Don't just let things just sort of plateau until the next time you need them and then call them up and say, I'm in a bind again. Keep that relationship healthy, strong, and intact. One of the things that I love about this church is we are a church comprised largely of small groups. And those small groups have been a lifeline for so many of you. And if you are not yet a part of a small group, this is a good time to maybe inquire about getting involved with one. We'd love to get you matched up with a group that would be a good fit. But I've seen you guys deliver meals. I've seen you visit hospitals. I've seen you welcome new babies into the world. I've seen you work with each other through layoffs and through divorces and through deaths in the family and all of the sticky, messy, painful, difficult stuff of life. And we don't have to do it alone. And one of the blessings of being a part of a church community is that we have that. We have a community of people who are built-in Deborahs who say, I want to be there. Surely I will go with you through this experience. And what an incredible gift that is, because when you are in the depths of that, you know that there is nothing else like that power. Finally, let me say this. We have our earthly Deborahs. But one of the things that sets Christianity apart, that's so incredibly special, is that we have a faith where God said, I do not want that distance between humanity and me any longer. And God sent an ultimate, for all time deliverer to come, not through military might, not with a conquest attitude of a warrior, not to make peace through violence, but to say, I am going to be the ultimate deliverer for all time for humanity in Jesus Christ. And he walks with us through the worst parts of our lives, and he celebrates with us through the elation and the glorious, wonderful things that are our greatest gifts and blessings. We cultivate the relationships with our earthly Deborahs. We cultivate and build on and strengthen the relationship with our Christ, who loves us and walks with us as well. And that combination of having both will allow us to remember that we are always delivered, we are never abandoned, and we never walk alone.
Thanks again for being here with us for worship. We're glad that you joined us for S3. If you'd like to know more about the church, discipleship opportunities, or ways that you can serve, be sure to click on one of the links below. Also, if you're interested in supporting the church beyond your prayers and your presence, we hope that you'll consider giving financially as well, and you can find that link on our page as well. Thank you for being here. Have a great week.